This conference will now be recorded.
Yeah. Good morning, all. Hope you can able to hear me.
Yeah, it's audible, Rizwan.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the output of your last class, where we have done this filtering, sorting, and we just replaced the list with a table. So in today's class, we are going to see the last topic with JSON model, and from tomorrow's class, we are entering into the OData development. And the topic is developing F4Help. So basically, what is F4Help? So most of the people already know. Doesn't matter. No need to explain actually until unless you are not a bapper. So let us take. There is a field called employee ID. So you need to fill the employee ID. But unfortunately, you don't remember the employee ID. But you remember a part of the employee name. You remember his employee designation. You remember his skill. Okay, so you remember some other details apart from employee ID. So in that case, generally what we do for these kind of things, we provide a button at the corner of this particular input field. Okay, so this button at the corner of the input field, so which is called as F4 help button. Okay, this button is called F4 help button. The moment you click this button, the moment you click this particular button, a pop-up should open. A pop-up should open. And in this pop-up, okay, a pop-up should open. And in this pop-up, we generally show the table with several columns or whatever the number of columns as the client wants. So we show the table like this. Okay. And in this table, I will show all the employee list here. I will show all the employee list. So with the search button, okay, so you can search for the employees too by clicking, by typing the search, by typing something in the search field. So here I will show all the columns like employee ID, employee name, designation, whatever, okay, skill and location. Okay, and this table will be filled with the data like employee ID 1001, employee name something something. Okay, and the entire table will be filled with the data. So this is the pop-up dialog. So this entire thing will be open in a dialog. Okay, so the dialog will also have a close button. The dialog will also have a close button in case you don't want to use this pop-up dialog. You can close it at any moment. Okay, and the moment you find the appropriate employee and you select the row of the table, when you select any row of the table, okay, so you will read the employee ID from this row. So how do you read the employee ID from this row? The moment you select an item from the table or a list, okay, so how to read the value? So we need to read it by binding context. So binding context is an object that points to the selected item or selected row data, okay, which we already seen in our previous classes. So you will go to this row, read its binding context. Okay, from the binding context, you read employee ID alone because so from the entire row, when you select the row, you need to extract only the employee ID and you need to display that employee ID in the input field. You need to display the employee ID in the input field. Okay, so with that, you need to display this employee ID in the input field and you need to close the dialog box. Okay, this pop-up dialog has to be closed the moment he selected the row. Okay, so this is called F4Help functionality. This is called F4Help functionality. So now let us see how we can develop this. Let's go to our coding. So let us open the view first and controller as well. So in the view, I'm going to create a simple form with only a label and an input field, just like this. Okay, so you can see a label here and an input field here. Okay, so just like this, I will create a simple form, and I will create a F4Help button at the corner of the input field. The moment you click this, a pop-up should open. So how to open the pop-up, that I will tell you. And in the pop-up, the content of the pop-up is a table with a search field. So if you observe, the same I can use as a content of the pop-up, because this is already showing the table. So with a search field, so I can use this as a content of the pop-up. So anyway, I will just comment this, and later on I will copy the same and use this as a content of the pop-up. So as of now, I am going with a simple form layout here with only one field, employee ID. Okay, so employee information, select employee ID. So it's an input field, and I don't need all this stuff, right? So I just taken only a label with the input field. So you will find a simple form with a label and input field here. Got it? The next step is I need to create a button, so which is called F4Help button at the corner of the input field. So how can you create the button at the corner of the input field? This can be created by a property. The property name is show value help equals to true. The moment you write show value help equal to true, it starts showing the F4Help button. So it is also called as value help, okay, because it help to select your value. So it is also called as value help. So this is the button which I was showing in the diagram. Why this is called as F4Help or value help is, even you click the F4 button from the keyboard, okay, even you click F4, okay, function F4 button from the keyboard also, it's equal to pressing this. Okay, so that's the reason it is called as F4Help button. Okay, either you click this button or you click the F4 button from the keyboard, both the actions are same. Understand? Right. Now on press of the button, nothing is happening. Okay. So actually on press of the button, I need to open the pop-up dialog. I need to open the pop-up dialog. To open the pop-up dialog, first of all, you need to separately create your pop-up. Separately, you need to create your pop-up, and then opening the pop-up will see, we'll see later. The first thing is when you press this button, your ultimate aim is to open the pop-up dialog. But as of now, okay, you forget about the pop-up dialog. On press of the button, I just want to display some message, whether it is printing or not, okay, whether this action is working or not. Okay, that is my initial step. So pressing this button is an action, and the action name is value help request, value help request. So let me write on F4 help press. So I assigned a function and I need to implement the function now. So I'm implementing the function here. Okay. So just put some alert message as of now, just to test whether this is working or not. So you can write this one testing. So generally we use console.log and alert statements for debugging purpose quick debugging purpose. So without going to the F12, okay, going to the sources the way which I have shown you yesterday. So without going to all that stuff, for quick debugging purpose, you use alert statements and console statements. Now I'm clicking this button. So when you press this button, you assign a function, and inside this function, you have written an alert statement. So the alert statement should appear. Yes, it is appearing. This one testing is appearing. Okay, that means this function is getting executed fine. What is our next step? Now on press of this button, the pop-up should open. The pop-up dialog should open, and that pop-up dialog should have a table with a search field and the content, all the employees data. Right? This is our next step. Now I need to prepare my pop-up. The pop-ups in SAP UI5 will be prepared by using a separate lightweight view called fragment. So fragment is a lightweight view. Okay, fragment is also called as a very lightweight view. And that lightweight view will open before this main view. See, this is you are already in a view, and on click of this particular button, you have to open another view. So opening a view inside another view is not possible. So we open a fragment. Okay. So fragment is a lightweight view, so which is mostly used for the pop-up dialogs. So inside this particular fragment is a lightweight view. Inside the fragment, we create a dialog and its content. We create a dialog and its content. Okay, so let's go and create the fragment. So fragment will also be created inside the view folder because it comes under a view category only. So right click, new file, and here put some name. So F4 employee F4Help .fragment.xml. The fragment extension will be .fragment.xml. Okay, just click OK, and this is the fragment. So the way you have some empty template for a view, so similarly you will be having something for the fragment as well. Just a second. So there is some template for the fragment, and that is core fragment definition. Yeah. Yeah. So this is basically the empty template that should be there for a fragment. So whenever you define a fragment, this should be the empty template. Okay, this is called skeleton. Okay, so the way when you create a view, so you will have a skeleton, right? So similarly, this is the empty skeleton for a fragment. So the fragment starts with a fragment definition and ends with a fragment definition and the needed libraries here, right? Now inside this particular fragment, you need to create your pop-up dialog with its content. So as I have written dialog with its content, so I'm creating the pop-up dialog now. So this is dialog. You can keep a title, select an employee, any title you can write, not a problem. Now inside the dialog, I need to create the content of the dialog, and my content is nothing but, so inside the pop-up dialog, I want the table. So with the search field, all this stuff, I want the entire table. So since my table code is already there, which I implemented in the last class, so instead of typing, I can simply copy this table code, Control C, paste it here. Okay, right. So this is my table. Okay, so with all the column, search field, everything is present here. Okay, right. Right. Next, let us save this. So once your fragment is ready, so with the dialog and the table inside, on click of this particular button in the view, in the main view, we need to open this particular fragment. We need to open this fragment there. So what is the code? What is the action name? So which we are calling on click of this button. So let's go to the view. So you can see in the view, this button is show value help, and on click of the button, the action name is value help request, and you are calling the function on F4Help press. So inside this particular function, we need to open the fragment that we have created. Now let us see how to open the fragment. Okay. So I'm writing some code. I will explain it shortly. Just wait. This dot underscore. One second, a little. Yeah, just checking the code. That's correct. sap.ui.xml fragment. Right. So this takes three parameters, guys. So this particular fragment will accept three parameters. The first parameter is ID for the fragment. So we keep the ID of so whatever the ID of the view, so the same ID you will keep for the fragment also. This dot get view dot get ID. So why we keep the same ID for the fragment? So that we can access the UI elements in this particular fragment also by using this dot get view by ID. Okay. So definitely you need to access the table UI element, right? So when you select the row, or you need to access the close button that you will create in few minutes. So basically, to access any of the UI element in a fragment, so you will be using this dot get view by ID. So to use this, the fragment ID and the view ID should be same. So that's the reason as the first parameter we are sending this dot get view dot get ID, so that the view ID and the fragment ID both are same, so that I can easily access the UI elements within the fragment also by using this dot get view by ID easily. Right. So this is the first parameter. The second parameter is the path to the fragment. The path to the fragment is web app folder dot view dot emp f4help emp f4help. So this is the path to the fragment. So let me start writing com.oasis dot till here. This is the web app folder. Yeah, here it is. Okay, so this is pointing to the web app folder dot view dot your fragment name. Okay, so you no need to write dot fragment dot xml. You just need to write emp f4help. So this is the path to the fragment. And the last one is who is the controller for this fragment. Okay, see fragment, I told you this is also a kind of a view. Then who is the controller for this fragment? So the standard is the controller for the fragment should be the same controller in which you are opening this fragment. I am opening this fragment in the first view. So the controller for the fragment should be the first view's controller itself. Okay. So the last parameter is this. So what is this? This means current file. And what is current file? First dot controller.js. Okay. Right. So you have created this fragment object, so which is pointing to this dot underscore dialog. So it's a variable basically, and you need to write this dot get view dot add dependent dependent. What is the spelling of dependent? D-E-P-E-N-D-E-N-D. Okay, add dependent, and then dialog not open. Right. So this is the code that we need to write to open the fragment. Okay, to open this pop-up dialog. So let us understand what is the code that we have written. So forget about this if condition. First, let us understand these two lines and this line, and then I will explain the if condition. sap.ui.xml fragment. So this is used to load the fragment. First of all, this takes three parameters. The first one is ID for the fragment. So you need to give whatever the ID of the view. the same as your for the fragment, so that accessing the UI elements from the fragment becomes easy. Okay, so that's the reason we give this dot get view dot get id. So your view id and the fragment id both are same. Next, the path to the fragment. So this is the path to the fragment you have seen just now. Okay, web app folder, view folder, and then your fragment name, comma this. So this is nothing but the controller for the fragment. So fragment is also a kind of a view. So it needs a controller. Why? Why it needs a controller? So because I have close button here, I will be creating a close button here. So when I press the close button, or when I select the row from this table where you will write the code, to write the code you need a controller, right? So the controller for the fragment is also this. This means first dot controller dot js. So it returns an object that points to the pop-up, the content. It points to the content here, content of the fragment, which is your dialog. And you are making this particular fragment, this dot get view dot add dependent. So you need to make this dialog, that is your fragment, as a dependent for your view. This dot get view dot add dependent, and you need to make the fragment object as a dependent for the view. So the moment you make the fragment as a dependent for the view, then only you can able to access all the UI elements, or you can perform any action in this particular controller. Otherwise you cannot. So this particular statement is mandatory. You need to make the fragment as a dependent of your view. Okay, and then you are opening the fragment. Fine. Now let's come to why I have written this if condition, and what is this dot underscore dialog. You can define a variable in SAP UI5 in two ways. One is you can define it by using var. You can also define it without using var, but by simply writing this dot underscore. So what is the difference between defining a variable by using var and defining a variable by using this dot underscore? If you define a variable by using var, it will be accessible only within this function. Outside the function, it cannot be accessible. It doesn't know what is that variable at all. Okay. If you define a variable by using this dot underscore, you can access that variable outside the function also. So why I define it by using this dot underscore? Because I need to access this dialog outside the function. When I create a close button here, when I create a close button, I need to close the dialog. Same dialog I need to close. So for that, you will write another function, that is on close. You will write another function on close dialog. So here I need to open the same dialog, so I need the same object. So this dot dialog dot close, I will be writing like this. If I define this variable dialog with a variable var, if for example I define it by using var dialog, then I cannot able to get the same dialog in this close button to close the dialog, because the moment you define it by using var, its scope is within the function, and outside the function it cannot be accessible. Okay, so that is the reason. So we define this particular fragment with this dot underscore dialog. Hope you understand. So since I used this dot underscore, I can able to access in close function also. However, I have not created the close button yet. So I will create the close button, but just I have written the press action here. Okay, so on the press, I will call the same function. Okay, 1 second. Yeah. Right. Now, let us understand why I have written the if condition. This if condition makes sure that the pop-up dialog, this particular fragment, the fragment should be loaded only once. It should not be loaded again and again and again and again. So what this is doing, if not this dot underscore dialog means if this particular variable not containing anything means this particular variable is not pointing to anything. Okay, then load this particular variable, point this particular variable to the fragment. Okay, so for the first time, only for the first time, this particular dialog variable will not contain anything. And the moment it comes inside the if condition, this is pointing to the fragment and it will always points to the fragment. Now let's say I opened it and closed it and again I am opening the fragment. In that case, again this function gets executed, but now this particular variable is already pointing to the fragment, so it won't get inside the if condition because my fragment is already loaded. So you should not load the fragment again and again and again, which decreases the performance. Okay, so we are not loading it again. So that is why we have written this if condition. The if condition is controlling the behavior of loading the fragment multiple times. So the fragment should be loaded only once. That's the reason we have given this particular if condition. Okay. So from the second time, the fragment just opens instead of loading it again and again and again. The if condition, the complete if condition will not get executed. Only this particular statement gets executed. So the dialog will open. You already have the fragment and it will just open. And on the close, the dialog will be closed. Okay. Now I will create a close button also. So inside the dialog, if you want to create a close button, just like a footer, so you will have some place in the dialog which is called as end button. End button, what it does, it creates a footer for the dialog, and inside you can create your button text equal to close, press equal to. So we already written the function on close. Copy this, paste here. Okay, so this particular end button tag, it creates a footer. Actually it creates a footer kind of, and then inside the footer it keeps this particular button. Now save this. Let us refresh and check whether the pop-up is getting opened and closed or not. So I'm clicking this. Yeah, your pop-up has opened. Okay, and the search functionality, everything will work. For example, I'm typing NA. See, you can see the search functionality, everything will work because we already have the corresponding functions. So why all those are working? Because the controller for this particular fragment is also first.controller.js. So whatever the functions that we have written, so they are already still there in the first.controller.js, like onSearch, onSort are already there. So that's the reason they are working. So the controller for this fragment is also first.controller.js. Okay, right. And when you close, so it's working. Open, close, open, close. Okay, right. Now, if you select any one of the row, let us see what is already happening. So when you select the row, let us see the event selection change. Selection change is the event which is pointing to a function on select employee. So let us go and see what is on select employee is doing. So this is the function. This function is getting the binding context path and it is going to the second view. So the existing function is going to the second view. So If I click the row now, I will also go to the second view. Let us see. See, it is going to the second view, but this is not what is expected now. So this is behaving like that because previously this function you have written in such a way. Okay, but I don't want this function to be executed now because when I select the pop-up, when I select the row from the pop-up, okay, I want to extract the employee ID from that row. I want to extract the employee ID alone from that row, and I need to set that value to the input field. I need to set that value to the input field, and the pop-up should be closed. I don't want any navigation to any view or any view, nothing. So what I am going to do, I am going to change this function name on select employee from F4 or F4 help if you want to write on select employee from F4 help. So I have written another function. Now implement this particular function. So we can write it here on select employee from F4 help. So again, O event object concept will be there. Okay, right. Now from the selected row, so whatever the row that end user will select, so first I need to get that row, and from that row I need to get the employee ID, which you can do easily by getting its binding context of the selected row. So variable employee ID equals to, by using O event object dot get parameter. So what is the parameter name to get the selected row? Nothing but list item. So I already told you table and list have the same API. Okay, so whatever the code that you have written for the list, the same thing you need to use. O event dot get parameter list item. So this returns the selected row from the table dot get binding context. Get binding context is an object that points to the data of the selected row from the source. So what is the source? Data.json. So this array is the source. So whatever the row that you have selected, for example, I selected NAG, then it is pointing to this particular object, which is nothing but the binding context for that particular selected item or selected row. Now my binding context is pointing to this particular data. For example, if I select NAG, then it is pointing to this particular data. So from this, I need to get the employee ID. So start writing dot get property, and my property is employee ID. That's it. I got the employee ID. So if you want to check, so you can just put a let statement and print this value, whether it is coming or not. Okay. Anyway, so it will come. So I'm not printing it. So what is my next step? The moment you read the employee ID from the selected row, you need to take that value and set that value to the input field. So this dot get view dot by ID. So I'm pointing to the input field ID. So where is my input field? This is my input field. Copy this ID, paste it here, dot set value. So I need to set the value. So you already have the employee ID and just keep it here. That's it. You set the value. The moment I select any row, so I'm extracting the employee ID from that row and I'm setting this value to the input field, and you also need to close this pop-up automatically. So to close the pop-up, either you call this function or you write this statement. So anyway, both are single statements, so you can directly close the dialog. Or you can call this function and this function is closing the dialog. Anything is fine. Okay. So if you want to call this function, how to call that function? This dot close, this dot on close. So this is how you can call another function. from within a function. So inside this function, I am calling this one. So you do either of them. Okay, don't perform both. Okay, either you call this function, because this function is anyway calling the close dialog. But I feel that is not required because it's a single statement. If it is having some 10 lines of statement, calling this function is useful. All right, so that's it. So with this, we have successfully completed developing the fragment with a JSON model. So click this button and select whatever the row you want. For example, I am selecting Lalit row, and you can see 100003 in the input field. Okay, select it. For example, I am selecting Shiva. You can see 100006. Select, click 100001. You can see this. Okay, so that is how you need to work with the fragment. Okay, so that's it for today's class. So if you have any questions, you can ask me. Otherwise, I will close and give the project to you. Hope you got the video of the last class.
What is XML fragments?
What is
fragment.
Okay.
So library.
A fragment is also like a view only. So that's why we are creating.
I'm not asking that one. In the
Coding.
script, I'm asking. In the script.
1 second. Yeah. So you are asking this one, right?
Yeah,
What is this one? Okay. To load any fragment. So whenever you want to load the fragment, you will use this sap.ui.xml fragment, which is basically a static class in JavaScript. Okay, so since it is a static class, you don't. So when you want to load this, normally we use new, but we are not using new here because sap.ui.xml fragment is a static class. Okay, so anyway, that's something if you go deep into the object-oriented concepts. Okay, so it's a library. Yes, it's a library.
You can say it's
to
a
load
library.
your fragment. Yeah.
It says it's a library and it's a static class. Yes.
Basically, all the classes, methods, they comes under your library only. Okay, you call it as a class or you call it as a library. So both are same. Okay, so the higher level word is library. Okay, but if you go deep into that one, and if you ask, so that is basically a static class. Okay, the entire library is developed in the form of different methods, classes, right?
Okay. Okay, sir.
This one in the same line you're referring to the view, and from the view you're getting the ID, right?
So here we are not referring to the view. What we are doing, the fragment takes 3 parameters. The first parameter is you need to give some ID for the fragment. General, the standard is whatever the view in which you are opening the fragment, that view's ID you need to give as fragment ID also. Okay, so you need to maintain this standard because when you are pointing to any one of the UI elements in the fragment, you can also access those UI elements in the fragment also just by using this dot get view by ID. For example, I pointed out to the input field by using this dot get view by ID, right? Okay, so similarly, if you want to point to any of the UI element in the fragment, okay, so any table or anything, you can just use this dot get view by ID. Okay, so that is a first parameter.
Do we need to use the fragment only in a particular page, or can we use the same fragment in another pages also? I mean, in another views.
In any number of pages. Let's say I have second view. Tomorrow I will create some second view, or day after tomorrow I create some third view. Okay, so it doesn't matter how many number of views you have, you can you can copy the same code. Okay, so the fragment will be one only. You don't create multiple fragments. The fragment will be one only. And if you have the similar, use case, like you want to open a employee dialog, employee F4Help. So for all the employee F4Help scenarios in your application, you can use the same fragment instead of creating multiple. But for example, let's say tomorrow I have a material F4Help. So in that case, you need to create another fragment. You can't use the same fragment. Okay, so it makes sense, right?
Yes, yes. So, I mean, if we are calling that fragment in, let's say, some second view, then we need to write the code in second view controller also.
Exactly. So you need to write the same code there also. Okay. So it will check whether the fragment the fragment is already loaded or not. If it is loaded, it restricts from loading it again. Okay. So if it is
Okay.
already loaded, then it simply opens the fragment.
Get
Okay.
ID in the
Instead of,
sense,
sorry, instead of writing the fragment again and again and using the code again and again in another controller, can't we go for a simple view and reuse that view? Is that not possible?
No, see, you might be opening that fragment in different views, right? So now you created in the first view. Let's say you created in the second view. In that case, in second view, whatever the action that you are doing, you need to write the code in the second controller, right?
Yes.
Understand? So you will be
Yeah.
writing that in the second controller. So since it is a 1:1 relationship between the view and controller, see, the major part of the code is written in this employee fragment itself. Okay, this you have written separately. You are not writing this entire code. The only stuff you are doing is you are opening the fragment and you are checking whether it is already opened or not. So these two lines of code are must and should. Okay. So wherever you are implementing this employee F4 help, you need to check whether this fragment is already loaded or not. We are not writing some, more lines of code here. This is a check whether the fragment is already loaded or not, because we don't know whether it is open in the first view, whether it is open in the third view. So in whichever the view, we don't know, right? The employee can directly go to the second view also, because we have the unique URL for every page. The employee can directly go to the fourth view, so we don't know. So this check is mandatory.
Okay. Thank you.
yeah, the difference between this get ID and by ID is it's get ID in the sense it's taking whole fragment.
No,
Whole,
once again I'm repeating once again. See, this dot get view by ID is to point to the view and any one of the UI element inside the view. For example, by using this dot get view by ID, I am pointing to the input field in my view. Okay, in the first dot view dot xml, I am pointing to this input field. So this dot get view by ID is used to point any of the UI element in the view. Okay, and
okay.
here I'm not pointing to any view here. What I'm telling, whatever the views ID is there, take that view ID and keep the ID for the fragment also. So you need to understand that this is a first parameter in the loading of the fragment. When you are sap.ui.xml fragment, what it is doing, it is loading the fragment. And while loading the fragment, it takes three parameters. One is fragment ID, second one fragment location, third one fragment controller. And what I'm doing, whatever the view ID is there, so the same view ID, I'm making it for the fragment also. Okay, so the view ID and fragment ID become same. So what is the advantage if you write like this? The way you are accessing the view UI elements by using this dot get view by ID. So similarly, you can access your fragment UI elements also by using this dot get view by ID. If you don't write like this, okay, for example, you have removed this, or So you will remove this or you will write this. That's it. If you remove this, then you cannot access these UI elements. If you want to access table, you cannot access. Okay. By using this dot get view by ID, this dot get view by ID will point only to the first view UI elements. It will point only to these UI elements, not to these UI elements. Okay. So what we do, we write, the ID for the fragment also same as the ID for the view, so that you can easily access the fragment UI elements also by using the statement this dot get view by ID. So it's as good as giving an ID for the fragment. That's it. Okay, you are giving a unique ID for the fragment, and that ID you are, instead of hard coding, you are saying whatever the view ID is there, take the same.
Okay, I got it.
What you're saying is that instead of the ID, INP ID, we are saying as a this dot get view ID, right?
No. 1 second. What is the first view ID? What is the view ID? ID first, right? So what is this one? This is a unique ID for the first view. So this is your first view, and for this first view, you already given a unique ID called ID first. And what is this one? This is the ID for the second view, right? So similarly, for the fragment also, you need to give a unique ID. Okay. If you give a different ID for the fragment, accessing these UI elements is not possible. So the standard is, whatever the first view ID is there, the same ID you will give as a fragment ID also. Okay, so either you remove this and you can keep ID first, so which is your first view ID. You can see this is the ID of the first view. Either you do this. See, you need to understand that this is a parameter which basically saying define some ID for the fragment. You need to define some ID for the fragment. The way you define the ID for a view, similarly you are defining an ID for the fragment. Okay. But the standard is, whatever the view in which you are opening the fragment, the fragment ID and that view ID must be same. Why both should be same? Because to access the UI elements inside the fragment also, okay, you can simply use this dot get view by ID statement, and you can point. See, the way you are pointing to the input field here, this dot get view by ID. So for example, I want to point to this table, for example. Okay, so how can you point? By using this dot get view by ID, you can also point to this table. Okay, so for that, we are making the view ID and fragment ID must be same. So you write like hard-coded ID first view, or this statement, both are same. So what this statement is doing, it will go to the view and it will get its ID. Okay, and at runtime, this will be replaced with ID first only.
Okay. Yeah, good.
Okay, so any more questions? Final call for the questions. Okay, fine guys. So then from tomorrow, your OData classes will start. Okay. Have a nice day. Bye.